Man saved pregnant Mustang mare, and 3 years later the reunion will make you cry. It was a cold winter morning when Jason stumbled upon her, the Mustang mare. Her fur, a soft blend of chestnut and cream, looked matted with snow, and her breath came in quick, shallow puffs that hung in the frigid air. He could tell something was terribly wrong. She wasn't running, not grazing, not doing anything a wild horse would do. She was standing still, her eyes wide with fear, and though her hooves dug into the frozen earth, it was clear she was stranded. Jason had been hiking alone through the Nevada desert for weeks, searching for wild horses. He had a deep connection with these creatures, a bond formed over years of caring for abandoned and rescued horses, and an unyielding desire to protect them from harm. It wasn't uncommon for people to abandon wild horses, leaving them to fend for themselves when they were too weak to survive the harsh elements of the desert. This mare had been one of those forgotten souls. But Jason had a plan to change that. The mare's belly was large. It wasn't just the chill that made her stand so stiff, she was pregnant. Jason knew the timing wasn't ideal. A pregnant mare, stranded and in distress, could easily go into labor at any moment, and he didn't have the resources or support to help her on his own. But he couldn't just leave her there. Something inside him told him he had to try. He cautiously approached, speaking softly, trying to calm her. She was wary at first, her head jerking up at every rustle of the wind, but Jason's gentle voice eventually made her relax. Slowly, as though each step took great effort, she allowed him to get closer. Her body trembled as he gently touched her side, feeling the pulse of life growing inside her. Jason's heart broke for the mare. She was struggling, alone and with so much at stake. Jason had experience with horses, but this situation was different. The mare's condition was critical. He didn't know how long she had been out there, or how long she had been without food or water, but he knew time was running out. The sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the barren desert landscape. He knew he had to act fast. With a steady hand, he managed to lead the mare toward his camp. He carefully created a makeshift shelter for her, wrapping her in blankets and providing food and water. The mare was weak, but she trusted Jason, letting him help her through the night. That night, as the stars twinkled above, Jason promised her that she and her unborn foal would be safe. He wouldn't let anything happen to them. Over the next few days, Jason kept a constant watch on the mare. She grew stronger, but Jason's worry never eased. The mare was due to give birth any day, and the conditions weren't ideal. The temperature was fluctuating, and he didn't have the necessary tools or support to handle a birth in such a remote location. But the mare's strength amazed him. She was determined even in her exhaustion, and Jason admired her for it. Then one night it happened. The mare's water broke and Jason knew the time had come. He could hear her soft whinnies as the contractions began. He stayed by her side, trying his best to comfort her, even though he felt utterly powerless. As the hours passed, the mare's labor intensified and Jason's worry grew. He didn't know if he was doing enough, if he could help her in time. But he stayed with her, never leaving her side. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the mare gave birth to a beautiful, healthy foal. The tiny creature wobbled to its feet, its eyes wide with curiosity. The mare nuzzled her newborn, and Jason felt a flood of relief wash over him. They had made it. The mare and her foal were safe, thanks to his persistence and dedication. In the following days, Jason stayed with the mare and her foal, nursing them back to health. They slowly regained their strength, and Jason couldn't help but grow attached to the two of them. They had become his family, and he was determined to ensure they had the best life possible. When the time came to release them back into the wild, it was with a heavy heart that Jason let them go. He knew they were ready. They were strong and they had a fighting chance. But little did Jason know, that would not be the last time he would see them. 3 years later, something incredible would happen. It was a bright, sunny day when Jason received a call from a local rancher. He had been hearing rumors about a wild mare with a foal roaming the desert, and the rancher believed it was the same mare Jason had saved years ago. Jason couldn't believe it. He had been keeping tabs on the wild horse population, but he never expected to see the mare again. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew he had to try to find her. Jason set out on the same desert trail where he had found the mare all those years ago. His heart raced with excitement and fear. What if she didn't remember him? What if she had forgotten the bond they once shared? As he walked, he kept his eyes peeled for any sign of the mare or her foal. The desert seemed endless, but Jason was determined. After hours of searching, he finally saw a familiar shape in the distance, a mare with a foal at her side. His heart leapt in his chest as he approached. The mare looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. She was older now, her coat graying at the edges, but there was no mistaking her. It was the same mare. And when she saw him, something incredible happened. The mare's ears perked up, and she began to move toward him, her movements slow but deliberate. She remembered him. Jason stood frozen, overwhelmed with emotion. The mare's foal, now 3 years old and tall for his age, stood beside her, watching the reunion. The mare's nostrils flared as she drew closer, and Jason couldn't believe what was happening. He stretched out his hand, and the mare nuzzled him gently, as if thanking him for saving her all those years ago. Tears welled up in Jason's eyes as he felt the warmth of her touch. It had been 3 years, but the bond between them had never faded. The mare's foal, now a young stallion, approached cautiously, his eyes curious but respectful. He sniffed Jason's hand before nudging it gently with his nose. Jason laughed through his tears, feeling overwhelmed with love and gratitude. It was as if the past 3 years had melted away, and everything had come full circle. For a few minutes, the three of them stood together in the desert, surrounded by the vast, open landscape. The mare, her foal, and the man who had saved her. It was a moment of pure connection, a reminder that love and trust could transcend time and distance. Jason had never felt more connected to these creatures than he did in that moment. They had been through so much together, and now they had found each other again. As Jason stood there, stroking the mare's mane and watching her foal play nearby, he realized that this moment was a gift. It wasn't just about saving a life, it was about the bond that had formed between them, a bond that could never be broken. The mare had trusted him, and now, 3 years later, she had come back to him, showing him the depth of that trust. And as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the desert, Jason knew that this was the kind of reunion that would stay with him forever. It wasn't just a story of saving a horse, it was a story of love, hope, and the incredible power of connection. It was a story that would make anyone believe in the beauty of second chances, and in the way that life sometimes brings things full circle in the most unexpected and emotional ways. As the sun dipped lower behind the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Jason felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. The desert, vast and empty to most, seemed to hold a magic for him. Standing there in the cool evening breeze, he stroked the mare's soft coat and listened to the sounds of her foal prancing around them, testing his newfound strength. It was a sound he hadn't heard in years, yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, and for a moment, everything was still, just the mare, her son, and Jason. He had always believed in the connection between humans and animals, but this moment proved to him that there was something far deeper than simple affection or duty. It was as if the mare knew she could trust him even more than she had 3 years ago when she first allowed him to help her. She had survived, had thrived, and now, standing before him with her foal beside her, it felt as though she was thanking him for everything he had done to give her a chance. The foal, no longer a baby but a young, strong stallion, still showed a sense of curiosity, though his movements were much bolder than when Jason had first saved them. He was more cautious with humans, just as a wild horse should be, but the mare seemed to communicate with him in a way Jason could only begin to understand. She was clearly teaching him the ways of the wild, showing him the importance of freedom and independence. The stallion's coat shimmered in the fading light, his muscles rippling beneath his skin as he ran circles around his mother, trying to prove himself in the vast expanse of the desert. Jason watched in awe, marveling at the power and grace of the young stallion. He remembered the tiny foal who had wobbled to its feet 3 years ago, barely able to stand, and now here he was, a force of nature. It was a reminder of how much time had passed, how far the mare and her foal had come. In the back of his mind, Jason wondered if he had done enough for them, if he had really given them a fighting chance, but looking at the stallion now, he realized that some things couldn't be measured. Their bond wasn't about expectations or control, it was about trust, respect, and the natural instinct to survive. Jason gently touched the mare's shoulder, feeling the warmth of her body beneath his fingertips. She nuzzled him once more, her soft breath stirring the air. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he could feel her gratitude, her sense of relief that her son had made it through, that they had both made it. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now gleamed with a quiet confidence. She was no longer the fragile creature he had found on that cold winter morning. She was strong, fierce, and free, and he had played a part in that transformation. But this moment wasn't just about the mare or her foal. It was about Jason too. It was about how his life had been shaped by moments like these, moments that made him realize just how deeply connected he was to the world around him. He had always felt a calling to protect animals, to help those in need, but standing there in the desert with the mare and her foal, he understood that this was his purpose. His life had been built around this one simple truth, that every act of kindness mattered no matter how small it seemed. And in return, the universe had brought this reunion into his life. As the evening turned to night, Jason sat on a large rock, watching the mare and her foal graze nearby. The stars above them sparkled like diamonds, their brilliance reflected in the deep blue sky. It was in these moments of solitude, surrounded by the raw beauty of nature, that Jason felt closest to the mare. They shared something unspoken, a shared history that connected them in ways words never could. He realized that he had saved her, yes, but she had saved him too. Her resilience, her will to survive, had taught him more than any person ever could. And now, as the years had passed, it felt like she was offering him a gift of understanding, of shared purpose, and of a bond that could never be broken. But even as Jason marveled at the beauty of the moment, a part of him knew that this reunion wouldn't last forever. The mare was wild. She had a life to lead, a place to roam, and a family to raise. She had found her place in the desert, and Jason couldn't hold her here. He didn't want to either. Wild horses belonged to the land, to the open skies and the endless horizon. They were creatures of freedom, and no matter how much he cared for her, Jason knew he couldn't keep her. It was time to let go again, to set her free. Yet this time there was no sadness in that thought. There was only a sense of completion, of knowing that he had done what he could for the mare, that he had helped her find her way back to herself. And she had done the same for him. The stallion approached Jason, his eyes bright with curiosity. He nuzzled Jason's hand gently, as if offering a silent thanks of his own. Jason smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. He hadn't just saved a life 3 years ago, he had been part of something bigger, something that transcended the boundaries of human and animal. In a world where so much could feel uncertain, moments like these reminded him that there was still goodness in the world, still hope, still love. The mare, now standing next to her foal, turned her head toward the horizon. It was time. Jason stood up slowly, taking one last look at the pair, his heart full of love and gratitude. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't keep them here in the safety of his camp any longer. They had to go back to the wild, to their true home. He gave the mare a final pat on her neck, and she nickered softly in response, her eyes calm, her expression serene. She was ready. Jason watched as the mare and her foal began to walk away, side by side, their silhouettes framed against the vast desert. The stallion's powerful legs carried him forward with grace, while the mare followed closely behind. Jason knew they would be okay. They would survive. They would thrive. He stood there, rooted to the spot, watching them disappear into the distance, his heart full of both joy and sadness. It was a bittersweet farewell, but it was a necessary one. This was the way of life, the way of the wild. Nothing stayed the same forever, but that didn't mean the love, the bond, the connection would ever fade. As the last traces of daylight faded from the sky, Jason turned back toward his camp, feeling a quiet peace settle over him. He had done something good, something that had made a difference. He had saved a life, given a family a chance, and in return they had given him something far more valuable than he could have ever imagined. They had given him a lesson in love, resilience, and the power of freedom. Jason knew that his work wasn't done. There were still many more wild horses out there, still so many animals in need of help. But for tonight he allowed himself a moment of rest, knowing that the mare and her foal were out there, living their lives, thriving in the wild. And that was enough. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter that night, and as Jason lay beneath them, he drifted off to sleep, content in the knowledge that sometimes, the greatest acts of kindness are the ones that set others free. The days that followed were quiet, filled with moments of reflection. Jason found himself wandering back to the same spot where he had watched the mare and her foal disappear into the desert. It had been weeks since their reunion, yet he couldn't shake the image of them walking into the vast wilderness. It was a memory that had settled deep within him, and in the stillness of the desert, the mare's trust and the foal's strength had become part of his story too. Jason knew that the desert was a place of change, a place where survival was not a given, where only the strong and the resilient could thrive. And yet, despite the harshness of the landscape, there was beauty to be found in every shift of the wind, every ripple of the sand, every heartbeat of life that endured. He had spent years working to protect and rehabilitate wild horses, to give them a chance to survive in a world that often overlooked them. But he had never quite experienced anything like this, nothing that had so deeply touched his heart. The bond that had formed between him and the mare was undeniable, something more than just human kindness. It was a connection that spoke to the essence of life itself, a shared will to survive, to thrive, to live. It was a reminder that the world was not made up solely of humans. There were creatures out there struggling just as much, seeking a place to belong, to be safe and to be free. In the days after their parting, Jason kept visiting the same spot, sometimes just sitting in silence, his gaze fixed on the horizon, wondering where they had gone, if they had found new grazing grounds, if the stallion was growing stronger, more confident. The desert, expansive and empty, seemed to be the perfect home for them, but that didn't stop the questions that lingered in his mind. He wondered if they had faced any dangers, if predators had tried to approach, if the stallion had learned to defend his mother. Jason wanted to know, but he knew that he couldn't protect them anymore, not in the way he had before. Their freedom had come at a cost, the cost of his presence in their lives but also the cost of their absence in his. There were days when the emptiness felt louder than usual, when Jason would sit alone by the campfire at night, staring into the flickering flames, thinking about how much had changed since he'd first found the mare. That day seemed like a distant memory now, like something that had happened to someone else. But the truth was, that moment, the moment he had found her, weak and struggling, on the brink of death, had set into motion everything that followed. If he hadn't decided to intervene, if he hadn't taken that chance, the mare and her foal wouldn't have had the chance to live. They wouldn't have had the chance to experience the beauty of the wild, to roam the desert under the wide open sky. He would never know what happened to them in those final days, but he would always carry them with him, a part of his heart now devoted to the wild ones. It wasn't until the following spring, a full year after their parting, that Jason felt a shift. He had continued his work with other horses, saving those in need, rehabilitating those that had been abandoned or injured, and helping to restore balance to the wild herds that had been decimated by overgrazing and loss of habitat. But something about that year felt different. His heart longed for the mare, for the bond they had shared, for the chance to see how the foal had turned out, whether he had become the leader Jason hoped he would be. The desert had its own rhythm, and Jason was beginning to feel that rhythm in his bones. He was a part of it now. He wasn't just someone who observed the wild from the outside. He had been changed by it, had learned from it, and perhaps in some way had become it. One morning as the sun rose over the desert, a sound broke through the silence, a soft whinny carried on the wind. Jason paused, unsure whether he had imagined it, but then he heard it again, louder this time. His heart raced as he stood up, scanning the horizon. It couldn't be. Could it? He squinted against the bright morning light and then he saw them. The mare, the same one he had saved 3 years ago, stood at the edge of a canyon, her coat now gleaming with health. And beside her, trotting with the same youthful exuberance, was the stallion, the foal he had saved. He had grown into a powerful young horse, his coat as dark as night, his muscles rippling beneath his skin as he moved with confidence and grace. For a moment, Jason's breath caught in his chest. It was them. They had come back. His heart swelled with emotion as he approached slowly, careful not to startle them. The mare seemed to sense his presence before he even moved, her ears flicking toward him, her head held high. She stood still for a moment, her gaze meeting his. And then, just as she had done 3 years ago, she took a step forward, as if inviting him to come closer. Jason moved with slow, deliberate steps, his hand outstretched as he neared the pair. The stallion hesitated, his wild instincts flaring for a moment, but the mare nudged him gently with her nose, guiding him to stay calm. Jason stopped a few feet away from them, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never expected this, never imagined that the mare and her foal would return to him. He had let them go, given them the space they needed to be wild, to live their lives. But here they were, reunited once again, and this time, it felt like fate had brought them back together. The mare nickered softly, and for the first time, Jason noticed the small scars along her legs, remnants of the battle she had fought years ago, the battle that had brought them together. But now she was whole. She was free and she was strong. She had survived, and her foal, now a proud young stallion, had flourished in the wild. Jason smiled, his eyes filled with tears as he reached out to touch the mare's shoulder, his fingers brushing against the rough texture of her coat. She leaned into him, and in that moment he knew that their bond hadn't been broken. It had only grown stronger, anchored in the wild. The stallion moved closer, still cautious but no longer afraid. He stood beside his mother, looking at Jason with a sense of recognition. There was no mistaking it. This was the foal he had saved, the one who had fought for his life, who had been so small and fragile when he first encountered him. And now here he was, a majestic creature, strong and healthy, standing proudly beside the mare. The silence between them was profound, filled with a sense of understanding. Jason didn't need words, he knew what this moment meant. The mare and her foal had returned because they wanted to show him how far they had come. They wanted to thank him in their own way for everything he had done for them. But more than that, they wanted to share their success with him. They had survived the wild and they had done it together. They were no longer the same animals they had been when they first met. They had grown, they had learned, and they had thrived. Jason felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him as he watched the mare and her foal in the golden light of the morning. It was a gift he had never expected, a reunion that had come at the perfect time, when he needed it most. This was the reminder he had been waiting for, that no matter how hard life could be, no matter how many struggles one faced, there was always hope, always a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to grow. The stallion moved a little closer, and this time Jason didn't hesitate. He knelt down slowly, reaching out to touch the young horse's neck. The stallion tensed for a moment, unsure, but then after a few seconds he relaxed, allowing Jason to touch him gently. It was a gesture of trust, one that told Jason everything he needed to know about the strength of their bond, about the power of the wild, and about the beauty of survival. As the mare and her foal turned to leave, Jason stood up, watching them disappear once again into the desert. They had come back to show him that their journey wasn't over, that they were still out there, living and thriving. And in return, Jason had been reminded of the very thing he had spent his life fighting for, the belief that every life, every creature, deserves the chance to be free. As the sun rose higher, Jason turned back to his camp, knowing that the reunion he had just witnessed would stay with him forever. It wasn't just the mare and her foal who had been saved, it was Jason himself, saved by the connection they shared, by the reminder that the wild was a place of healing, a place of strength, and a place of endless possibility.